Okay, so everyone thinks they know my story, but they don't. I'm Alice, I'm 28, and yeah, I had an affair. But before you start judging me like everyone else did, maybe you should hear what actually happened instead of just believing whatever. Sob story: my ex-husband Cameron told everyone Cameron and I were married for 6 years. And let me be clear about something. Those Instagram couples who post cute anniversary photos every year? Total lies. Real marriage is living with someone who thinks leaving dirty dishes in the sink is acceptable, and who genuinely believes that. Watching the same 3 TV shows on repeat counts as quality time together. Cameron's 30, works in logistics, and has the personality of unsalted crackers. I work in client services, nothing glamorous, but it pays my bills. The thing about Cameron is that he's what people call a good guy, which is code for boring but harmless. He pays his share of rent, remembers to take out the trash most weeks, and has never cheated on me. Congratulations, Cameron, you've met the absolute bare minimum requirements for being a decent human being. But here's what nobody talks about. When they're busy praising good guys. Good doesn't make your heart race. Good doesn't make you feel alive or desired, or even particularly interested in your own life. Cameron could predict every conversation we'd have, every restaurant choice, every weekend plan. Dating him was like being trapped in the most pleasant, suffocating routine imaginable. I tried to connect with him for years. I'd suggest new restaurants, plan surprise date nights, try to get him interested in things I cared about. His response was always the same. A polite smile, a non-committal, sure, honey. And then somehow we'd end up doing exactly what we always did anyway. It's like he was allergic to spontaneity or genuine excitement about anything. The worst part was how satisfied he seemed with our relationship. While I was slowly dying of boredom, he acted like we had this perfect little life together. He'd tell his friends how lucky he was to have such a low-maintenance wife, like the fact that I'd stopped asking for things I wanted was some kind of virtue. Meanwhile, I felt invisible in my own marriage. When Andrew started working in our department 8 months ago, I noticed him immediately. Not because I was looking for someone to cheat with, I'm not that kind of person, but because he was actually interesting. He asked thoughtful questions during meetings, had opinions about things, seemed genuinely engaged with the world. Around him, it was like meeting someone who spoke a different language than the one I'd been stuck with for 6 years. At first, we were just work friends. We'd grab coffee during breaks, complain about difficult clients, talk about normal coworker stuff, but Andrew had this way of actually listening when I talked. When I mentioned being frustrated with something, he'd ask follow-up questions instead of just nodding and changing the subject like Cameron always did. When I made a joke, he'd laugh, like he actually thought I was funny. I started looking forward to going to work, which was a weird feeling after years of just going through the motions, not because of the job itself, but because Andrew would be there. We'd find reasons to collaborate on projects, stay late to finish up things that could easily wait until the next day. I told myself it was just nice to have a friend who actually cared about what I had to say. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't. Notice the way he looked at me. Really looked at me, like I was someone worth paying attention to. When was the last time Cameron had looked at me like that? When was the last time I felt attractive or interesting or like someone actually wanted to spend time with me? With Andrew, I remembered who I used to be before marriage turned me into this invisible, forgotten version of myself. The thing that really got to me was how guilty Cameron tried to make me feel for having a friendship. He'd ask why I was working so much overtime, like I was doing something wrong by staying late. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about how much I talked about work, like I wasn't allowed to be excited about anything that didn't revolve around him. The irony was unbelievable. He'd ignored me for years, then suddenly cared when I found someone else to talk to. His jealousy just made me more defensive. If he was so worried about me having male friends, maybe he should have tried being the kind a friend I actually wanted to talk to. Maybe he should have been the person I was excited to share my day with, instead of just assuming I'd always be there waiting for whatever scraps of attention he felt like giving me. I remember the first time Andrew and I went out for drinks after work. Just the two of us talking about life and dreams and all the things Cameron never wanted to discuss. Andrew told me about places he'd traveled, books he'd read, ideas he had about maybe starting his own consulting business someday. He had ambition and passion and this energy that made everything seem possible. When I got home that night, Cameron asked where I'd been. I told him the truth. I'd been getting drinks with a coworker. His response was a grunt and a question about whether we had eggs for breakfast tomorrow. No curiosity about who I'd been. With no interest in what we'd talked about. No acknowledgement that his wife had just had the best conversation she'd had in months, just breakfast logistics. That's when I realized how little Cameron actually cared about my happiness. He cared about his routine, his comfort, his breakfast being available when he wanted it. But my actual feelings, my need for connection and meaningful conversation, completely irrelevant as long as I wasn't disrupting his schedule. So when Andrew started texting me outside of work hours, I texted back. When he suggested meeting up on weekends, I found excuses to leave the house. And when Cameron asked where I was going, I told him I was running errands or meeting girlfriends. Or whatever would stop the questions. Because honestly, what was the alternative? Tell him I'd found someone who actually enjoyed my company? Explain that I'd rather spend time with Andrew than sit at home watching him scroll through his phone. All weekend? The physical stuff didn't happen immediately. We were friends first. Real friends who actually cared about each other's thoughts and feelings. But when you connect with someone on that level, when you feel seen and appreciated for the first time in years, wanting more isn't that big of a leap. Especially when you go home every night to someone who treats you like a roommate instead of a wife. I wasn't proud of lying to Cameron, but what choice did I have? If I'd told him how unhappy I was, he would have made promises he had no intention of keeping. He would have tried harder for maybe 2 weeks, then slipped right back into his old patterns. I'd seen that cycle before, at least with Andrew. I knew I was getting someone who genuinely wanted to be with me. After 8 months of living this double life, I couldn't pretend anymore. I was exhausted from being two different people, the dutiful wife at home who pretended everything was fine, and my real self at work who felt alive and interesting and desired. The contrast was killing me. I knew I had to choose, and honestly it wasn't difficult. Andrew made me feel things Cameron never had. He challenged me, made me laugh, made me feel like I was worth pursuing with him. I could imagine a future that was actually exciting, instead of just existing day after day in the same boring routine. But I'm not stupid. I knew that just asking for a divorce would make me look like the bad guy. People don't understand that marriages can die slowly, quietly, without dramatic fights or obvious problems. They want clear villains and victims. And if I just said I wasn't happy anymore, everyone would think I was having some kind of midlife crisis. So I decided to be honest about the affair. But frame it properly. I wasn't going to lie about what had happened. That would have been worse. But I also wasn't going to let everyone think I was some monster who destroyed a perfect marriage for no reason. The affair was what happened because our marriage was already over. We just hadn't admitted it yet. I planned exactly what I would say. I'd tell Cameron that I'd fallen out of love with him, that we'd grown apart, and yes, I'd developed feelings for someone else. I'd acknowledge that having an affair was wrong, but I'd also explain that it happened because our marriage had been dead for years. We'd just been too comfortable or too scared to face the truth. The key was getting him to agree to keep the details private, not because I was ashamed, but because airing our problems publicly wouldn't help anyone. We could have a clean, mature divorce where nobody had to be the villain. We'd just say we grew apart, realized we wanted different things, decided to end it before we started hating each other. When I finally told him, I tried to be as gentle as possible. I explained that I'd been unhappy for a long time, that we'd both changed, that neither of us was getting what we needed anymore. I told him about Andrew, focusing on the emotional connection rather than details that would just hurt him more. I made it clear this wasn't about him not being good enough. We were just incompatible. His reaction was so typically Cameron, lots of hurt feelings and wounded pride, like I'd personally attacked him instead of being honest about our situation. He kept asking why I hadn't talked to him about being unhappy, like I hadn't tried to connect with him 1,000 times over the years. He acted like this was all news to him, like he'd had no idea anything was wrong. Got confirmed I'd made the right choice. If he was really that oblivious to how disconnected we'd become, if he honestly thought everything was fine between us, then we were even more incompatible than I'd realized. A good partner pays attention. A good partner notices when something's wrong. Cameron had been sleepwalking through our marriage for years. I tried to explain that this could be good for both of us. We could find people we were actually compatible with, people who made us genuinely happy instead of just comfortable. We had a prenup, so the financial stuff would be straightforward. We can maybe even stay friends, look back on this someday as the moment we both started living more authentic lives. But Cameron kept obsessing over the affair, like that was the only thing that mattered. He couldn't see the bigger picture, that our marriage had been dying for years and Andrew was just the final sign that it was time to let it go. He wanted every detail about what had happened, like that would somehow change anything. I had to put my foot down. Rehashing every detail would just hurt both of us more, and it wouldn't change the fact that our marriage was over. The mature thing was to focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past. If we could both agree to keep the specifics private, we could get through this with our dignity intact. For a moment, I thought he was going to be reasonable. He seemed to understand that making our problems public wouldn't help anyone. He agreed that we should tell people we'd grown apart, but it was mutual, that there were no hard feelings. I actually felt hopeful that we could handle this like adults. But then Cameron had to ruin everything. 3 weeks after our conversation, he went out drinking and decided our agreement meant nothing. He sent this long, dramatic text to our entire friend group, spilling every detail about the affair and making me look like some heartless monster who destroyed our perfect marriage. I couldn't believe it. We had an agreement. We shook hands on it. I trusted him to handle this maturely, and he threw it all away because he couldn't deal with his emotions like a grown man. Instead of processing his feelings privately, maybe talking to a therapist, he decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. The text was so manipulative. He painted himself as this devastated victim who'd been blindsided by his evil wife's betrayal. No mention of how disconnected we'd been for years. No acknowledgement of his role in our marriage failing. Just poor Cameron betrayed by his terrible wife who'd been lying to him for months. Within hours, everyone knew. Our friends, our families, our co-workers. Because someone in that group chat knew someone at my company. By Monday morning, I could feel people staring, whispering, judging me based on Cameron's version of events. The version where he was perfect and I was a monster. Everyone immediately took his side. Nobody asked for my perspective. Nobody wondered if maybe there was more to the story. They just assumed that because he was the betrayed husband, he must be telling the truth about everything. Like marriages are that simple. Like one person is always innocent and the other always guilty. Then the real consequences started. My manager called me in and said several people had complained about the uncomfortable workplace dynamic between Andrew and me. Everyone had figured out he was the coworker I'd been involved with, and now they were acting like we were some HR disaster waiting to happen. I tried to explain that our relationship hadn't affected our work performance, that we'd been professional in the office, that this was really just office gossip getting out of hand. But she said the company had a strict policy about romantic relationships between employees, especially ones that started while one person was married. They fired both of us. Not a warning, not transfers to different departments, not a chance to prove we could keep our personal lives separate, just fired. Because our private relationship had become public gossip and the company didn't want to deal with the drama. I was furious. This was exactly why I'd wanted to keep things private. Not because I was ashamed of my feelings for Andrew, but because I knew people wouldn't understand. I knew they'd judge us without knowing the full story. I knew it would affect our careers in ways that had nothing to do with the actual situation. Cameron had destroyed everything. My job, my reputation, my chance at starting fresh with Andrew without all this baggage. He turned what should have been a private matter into public entertainment. And for what? Because his feelings were hurt? Because he couldn't handle his wife outgrowing him? The really sick part is he probably felt justified. In his mind, I'd betrayed him first, so all bets were off. He probably told himself he was just being honest, just setting the record straight. But what he really did was throw a tantrum because things didn't go the way he wanted. Now I was unemployed, humiliated, and dealing with judgment from people who had no idea what my marriage had actually been like. People who thought Cameron was some perfect husband wronged by his terrible wife. People who couldn't imagine that maybe a marriage could fail without anyone being a villain. I wasn't going to just take it. If Cameron wanted to play dirty, he was going to find out I could fight back. I started reaching out to our mutual friends, telling them my side. I explained how unhappy I'd been, how Cameron had neglected our marriage for years, how the affair was really just a symptom of deeper problems. Some people listened, but most had already decided. Once someone labels you the villain, nothing new. Say matters. They'd nod while I talked, but I could tell they thought I was just making excuses. Like there was no possible explanation for cheating that could justify it in their minds. I tried a different approach with my family. I called my mom and sisters and laid out the whole timeline. How Cameron and I had grown apart. How lonely I'd been. How Andrew had made me feel alive again. I thought they'd understand, especially my sister who'd been through her own difficult divorce. But even they were disappointingly unsympathetic. My mom kept saying things like, marriage is hard work, and you made a commitment like I hadn't tried for 6 years. My sister suddenly became this expert on marital fidelity, despite leaving her own ex because he was boring. The hypocrisy was unbelievable. Everyone wanted to focus on the affair like it existed in a vacuum. Nobody wanted to talk about the years of emotional neglect that led up to it. Nobody wanted to acknowledge that Cameron had basically checked out of our marriage and left me to figure things out alone. They just saw cheating wife and decided that was all they needed to know. The worst part was how people started treating me differently. Friends stopped texting. Invitations to social events mysteriously disappeared. I'd see people at the grocery store literally cross aisles to avoid talking to me. Like adultery was contagious. Meanwhile, Cameron was getting all the sympathy and support. People were bringing him meals and inviting him out and treating him like some tragic figure. Nobody was asking him tough questions about why his wife had been so unhappy. Nobody wondered what he could have done differently. He got to be the victim while I became the neighborhood pariah. The job search was a nightmare. Word had gotten around my industry about what happened, and suddenly promising interviews went nowhere. I couldn't prove it, but I suspected people were Googling me and finding out about the affair. In a professional community this size, that kind of gossip travels fast. Andrew was having similar problems. He started looking for work in other cities, thinking maybe a fresh start somewhere new would help both of us. We talked about moving together, starting over where nobody knew our story. But even that felt complicated now that everyone saw us as the scandalous couple. The stress was destroying our relationship. What had felt effortless and natural when it was new and secret now felt forced and difficult. We were both defensive and frustrated, and we started taking it out on each other. He'd make comments about how this wouldn't have happened if I'd handled things differently. I'd snap back that he knew what he was getting into. The fights got worse. Andrew started seriously considering that job offer in Denver, talking about starting fresh without all this baggage. He said it wasn't about me, but I could read between the lines. He was embarrassed by the whole situation. He was tired of being seen as the homewrecker. He wanted to go somewhere he could just be Andrew again, not that guy Alice cheated with. When he finally told me he was taking the job and moving, I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, heartbroken, furious, but not surprised. Everyone in my life was abandoning me because things had gotten difficult. Nobody wanted to stick around and deal with the mess, even though most of it wasn't my fault. After he left, I had this moment of clarity about how unfair everything was. I'd been honest about my feelings. I tried to handle the divorce maturely. I'd been willing to take responsibility for my part in our marriage failing. But because Cameron couldn't handle being told the truth, I'd lost everything. 6 months later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post congratulating Cameron on his new chapter. He'd been promoted at work and was dating someone new. Some woman named Sarah who worked in his building and looked exactly like the type who'd think Cameron was fascinating. I stared at that post for 20 minutes, feeling this mix of rage and disbelief. 6 months ago, he was supposedly devastated by our divorce. He was the heartbroken victim blindsided by his terrible wife's betrayal. Now he was thriving, getting promoted and finding love like our entire marriage had meant nothing. Meanwhile, I was still unemployed, still dealing with fallout from this text message tantrum. I'd burned through most of my savings. I'd had to move into a tiny apartment because I couldn't afford anything decent. But Cameron? Cameron was doing great. The worst part was seeing how genuinely happy he looked in the photos. Happy in a way I'd never seen during our marriage, which proved what I'd been saying all along. We weren't right for each other. He needed someone who thought his boring stories were interesting. I needed someone with actual depth. But did anyone acknowledge that maybe our divorce had been right for both of us? Did anyone point out that if Cameron was this happy with someone else, maybe Alice hadn't been such a terrible wife after all? Of course not. The narrative was still that I destroyed a good man's life, even though he was clearly better off. Without me. 2 years later, and I'm done feeling guilty about any of it. I'm done apologizing for wanting more than what Cameron could give me. I'm done pretending that staying in a dead marriage would have been noble. Everyone wants to act like I'm a monster. But at least I had the courage to admit when something wasn't working. Yeah, I lost my job. Yeah, I lost friends. Yeah, my family thinks I'm a disappointment. But I didn't lose my self-respect. I didn't lose the knowledge that I'm capable of feeling real passion and connection. Cameron never would have given me that, no matter how long I'd stayed. The dating scene has been brutal, word gets around, and apparently having one affair makes you damaged goods forever. Men hear about my history and suddenly lose interest, like they're afraid I'll cheat on them too. They don't understand the context. They don't know I was faithful to Cameron for years while he slowly killed our marriage through neglect. My cousin Lydia is literally the only family member who still talks to me regularly. She's the only one who bothered asking for my side instead of just believing whatever Cameron told everyone. She's been trying to get me to move to Chicago. Start fresh where nobody knows anything about my past. Some days that sounds really appealing. I heard Cameron and Sarah got engaged last month. Engaged to someone he's known for less time than Andrew and I were together. But somehow that's romantic and beautiful, while what Andrew and I had was sordid and wrong. It just proves the whole thing was never about the affair. It was about people needing a simple story with clear good guys and bad guys. I keep thinking about all the women who stay in marriage as they hate, because they're afraid of being judged. The way I've been. All the women who settle for men who don't really see them because leaving would make them look selfish. How many people are living half lives because they're too scared to admit they made the wrong choice? At least I tried. At least I was brave enough to go after what I wanted, instead of accepting whatever scraps Cameron was willing to give me. Maybe it didn't work out how I planned, but at least I lived. At least I felt something real, even if it was temporary. That's more than most people can say. Everyone acts like staying in that marriage would have been noble. But what's noble about wasting your life with someone who doesn't really want you there? What's noble about pretending to be happy when you're dying inside? Cameron's better off with Sarah, someone who appreciates his particular brand of boring, and I'm better off alone than pretending to love someone I'd outgrown years ago. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't change much. I'd probably be more careful about the workplace stuff, avoid the professional fallout. But leaving Cameron? Finding out what it felt like to be truly desired? Refusing to settle for a lifetime of quiet desperation? I'd do all of that again in a heartbeat. People can judge me all they want. They can whisper and avoid me and act like I'm some cautionary tale, but they're going home to their own mediocre relationships, their own compromises, and settling for less than they wanted. At least I know what real passion feels like. At least I know what it's like to be completely seen and appreciated. Most of them will never have that. So yeah, I'm alone now. My life didn't turn out how I planned, but I'm not sorry for trying to find happiness, even if it meant breaking some rules. I'm not sorry for refusing to spend my life being grateful for scraps. And I'm definitely not sorry for showing Cameron that some women won't just stick around forever while you take them for granted. Maybe someday I'll find someone who understands that my past doesn't define me. Someone who sees that being willing to leave a bad situation shows strength, not weakness. Someone who appreciates that I know what I want and I'm not afraid to go after it. Until then, I'd rather be alone and authentic than coupled up and miserable. Cameron can keep his perfect little life with his perfect little wife, who thinks his boring stories are fascinating. I hope they're very happy in their very predictable, very safe, very mediocre existence. As for me, I'm still out here actually. Living, still refusing to settle, still believing I deserve more than just good enough. Maybe that makes me the villain in everyone else's story, but it makes me the hero in mine.